Why, hello again. If you're watching this video, that means you want to learn about theme. Alright, so we're going to continue our notes. If you have been following along with all the notes thus far, this is going to be the last element of narrative, or the last element of a story. My theme lessons usually come way after I teach all the other elements, so this is going to be the final one. If you are watching this video in the elements of narrative in order, you should probably skip this video and come to it to a later time. Usually when I teach this lesson, I have the theme stuff as a completely separate lesson because it can be complicated. So I would recommend skipping this video if this is like you going in order for all of the elements of narrative. But that's just me. Okay. All right. Continuing on where we left off last time, we were talking about plot tracking on the last video, and we need to update our table of contents. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quickly. Now, if you're following along with my notebook exactly as it is, then you're going to be on page 14. Again, I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. My notebook is not perfect. Okay. This is understanding theme, or just theme notes in general, whatever you want to say. Okay, so let's talk about theme, okay? Now, theme can be simultaneously the easiest element of a story, and it can also be the most difficult element of a story, depending on your experiences, your reading levels, things like that. I like to think that I'm really, really proficient at teaching theme, but yeah, you judge for yourself, I guess. Okay, so what are we actually doing today? We're talking about how do you build a theme. And this is actually, in Arizona, this is one of the largest standards that exist. It's a standard that starts somewhere in elementary school, and it carries all the way into senior year. So yeah, let's get to it. Okay, why do you need to learn this stuff in the first place? So here's the thing. It's really important to build an emotional connection with a story. Otherwise, you're not going to really get anything out of it, right? So theme can help you get to that level. It can help you establish an emotional connection with the characters, with the situation that's happening, with the overall conflict, everything else, right? Now, if you have the ability to connect with a story, then obviously you're going to be in a better situation in terms of reading ability, but it will also enable you to respond to your own emotions and the emotions of the characters, and you could just be a more level-headed person, so to speak, okay? Now, in my classroom, I honestly ask my students this all the time. Have you ever felt like any of the following: that you're not very good at reading, that you can't connect with the story, that you just, you don't get it, or you think a story is boring, right? So if you are one of those kids or teachers, I don't know, whoever's watching this video, if you're one of those people that falls into this category, it could be because you struggle with theme, even though you don't think you do, okay? If you've ever had a situation where you just don't get the story, theme can help you get to that point where you do understand the purpose of a story. So it's one thing to be able to read a story or watch a movie, for example, and understand the events in the plot. That's one skill. It's an entirely different skill to be able to understand like the reason why that story was created. And that's what theme teaches you, or at least provides you with, right? So hopefully this tutorial will give you something to think about. Okay, and if you're a teacher watching this, I just want to have full disclosure. This is a technique. When I talk about teaching theme and all that, this is a technique that I got from another teacher. So I am not like 100% responsible for this content. I was inspired by somebody else's technique, and I kind of took that and ran with it and made it my own a little bit. And that's where I'm coming from. Okay. Anyway, if you want to read that PowerPoint slide, you can, right? I'm just going to jump right in. So the first thing that we want to do is start off with a basic definition. In my classroom, I would always quiz kids on what is theme, but, if you're watching this as part of the elements of lit, you should already know. Okay? All right, basic definition. So theme. The theme of the story is going to be a hidden universal message. So let's start off with the definition. It is the hidden universal message. Okay? Theme is the hidden universal message of the story. Now, sometimes you're going to see teachers that are going to refer to this as the main idea of the story, the moral of the story, the central idea, things like that, right? it's kind of all the same thing. Some of the terms can be interchanged with each other. Some of them cannot be. We'll talk about the differences here in a second. But let's also get a definition for this word, universal. If you don't know what universal means, it basically stands for the idea that something can apply to anyone, anywhere, anytime. Now, I don't have a fantastic example of this, but I like to pick on the Hunger Games because I don't like the Hunger Games because I think it's a ripoff of another series. And let's talk about The Outsiders, okay? Most of my students have read The Outsiders. Most of my students love The Outsiders. It's a pretty universal story. It's a story about, you know, a young person who makes a mistake and they're trying to reflect on who they are, how they got to that place in time, and what can they do to fix the problem, right? Now, take that book and give it to somebody in another country, like another group of kids. They're probably going to be able to connect with that central idea or that theme of making a mistake and, you know, having to repair it by inner reflection or whatever, right? Now take the Hunger Games. Okay. The Hunger Games, despite being a very popular book, I have problems with it in terms of the plot and things like that. But think about how universal of a story that is. You know, you have a very, very specific science fiction story about a female protagonist that has to, you know, help her people by surviving a situation. It's not as universal as something like The Outsiders, because partly because it's science fiction, partly because it's unrealistic. Part of it is just because, like, there are holes in the plot, and Katniss as a protagonist kind of reverses her decisions halfway through the series. Like, there's problems with it. So it's not as universal of a story, okay? Anyway, that's beside the point. Universal means it can apply to anyone, anywhere, anytime. Okay. Now, it's not like if you have a non-universal story, it's not like that's a bad story or anything. It just means it's not as flexible in terms of reach to the world, I guess. Okay, now take a look at this. I have this important note down here. So I need to kind of clarify some information because I'm going to make this mistake. Other teachers will probably make this mistake or thing, whatever you want to call it. I don't even know if mistake is the right word. Basically, here's the thing. When we're talking about theme, we're talking about the literary device of theme. You know, there are people out there that are going to be like, oh my God, the theme of my wedding is like fall, and there's pumpkins everywhere. Okay, that's not necessarily a theme. They're using the word theme to describe basically like a category or like a type of something. They're not using the literary term theme. Now, I could, on my magical bookshelf here, I could just whip out my Bedford Glossary of Critical Literary Terms and define theme for you. But basically, this definition right here, that is a hidden universal message of a story, works perfectly fine. And that is pretty much what their definition is. So, here's the thing. Sorry, hidden message of the story. Teachers are going to use the word theme and central idea. They're going to throw those words around all the time. And what students need to understand is that those terms are relatively the same thing, kind of. They're just used in different contexts. So if I have a piece of art, like a story, a poem, a song, a video game, a book, whatever, a film, if I have anything with a story, because it's an artistic thing, it has a theme. It has a message that the reader must uncover or construct, whatever. If I have an essay or a research report or a news article or something like that, something factual and, you know, data-driven or whatever, something that's not art, then that's going to have a central idea. Now, the central idea of an article or a essay or something is going to be something that the reader discovers, whereas a theme in art or literature is going to be something that the reader constructs, the reader builds, okay? Now, I'm not really sure how to like word that in the best way possible, but in my notes, I'm just going to put like a little note down here. Just say, note. And now this is how it makes sense to me. This may not make sense to you, but I'm going to say theme equals artistic medium. artistic medium like literature, poetry, film, songs, etc. Whereas central idea or the main idea, teachers use that term all the time too, is for information or informational text, like essays, articles, or reports. Okay, and I think that pretty much sums it up. So if somebody in the real world is saying, like, the theme of my birthday party is dinosaurs, okay, they're not referring to a literary theme. They're referring to, like, a category. Like, they are still referring to, like, an artistic style, but that's not the same thing as what we're talking about here. Now, if you're a teacher watching this video and you're like, wow, I could have really fixed that whole definition confusion thing for you, feel free to drop a comment or, reply to me somehow. Help me figure that one out. Basically, theme for literary sense is for artistic things. Central idea is usually reserved for informational text. Now, keep in mind, though, that other teachers are going to throw around these terms right here in purple. They're going to throw these terms around a lot. They're going to say that theme is commonly the moral of the story. It's the central message being said. It's the core idea of the text, whatever. It's all kind of the same thing as long as you remember that if it's art, you are creating the theme, in my opinion. And if it's a information piece, you are discovering it. Okay? We're gonna talk about that in a second too. If you're a teacher watching this, I specifically teach my students the idea that their interpretation of the story is the one that they need to worry about. So personally, for me as a teacher, I do not like the idea that there are correct answers for stories. What matters is the reader's ability to interpret the story. So I teach my students that they need to embrace the fact that they are creating some of this information, which if you've watched my other elements of story, that should make sense, like symbolism and things like that, and conflict, okay? Now, let's take a look at this. I'm going to have like a simple little T-chart that is going to explain what a theme is versus what it is not. So in your notes right here, you can skip 2 lines if you want to, or just do something like this. What theme is, what it is not. Now, I apologize in advance if anything I just said was confusing. I am filming this video in one shot. I'm not going back to edit it, so okay, what a theme is versus what it isn't. Take a look at this. So the first thing I have here is it is the hidden message of the story. It is the hidden message of the story. Okay, now I don't think you need to look at my notebook, so I'm just gonna keep the PowerPoint here for the big screen. Okay. Next thing, theme can be an important symbol, event, or an action that affects the characters. I don't like what I worded on my PowerPoint slide, so I'm going to say it can be an event, symbol slash action that affects the characters. That's a really loose way of defining it, just so you know. Like, the reason why I have that bullet point on there is because often I'll get students that are stuck on building their theme, and I have to remind them, well, what did the characters go through? Oh, right, they went through this thing. And then they can get the theme that way. So that's why I have that bullet point on there. Like, think about the Infinity Stones in a Marvel film. You know, that is not going to be the theme. But it will be a object that will help students reach the theme. So that's why I worded it that way. Okay. The theme can be an important lesson to be learned. It can be an important lesson to be learned, or an important lesson for the characters and audience. It can be an important lesson for the characters and the audience. It will most likely be something that makes the reader question their own ideas. So I'm going to say it usually is something that makes the reader question their own ideas. So it usually is something that makes the reader question their own ideas. For example, if we're using The Outsiders as our big go-to here, if you read The Outsiders and as a young teenager, you're like, you finish that book and you're like, I probably shouldn't stab people. Cool, it's making you question your own ideas because that whole stabby part in The Outsiders, kind of taught you the lesson that stabbing people is wrong. Hopefully, I don't know. I mean, maybe you don't have that conclusion. So, who knows? Now, lastly, I have here that sometimes, I would say like usually, sorry, again, I don't like how I worded this. I wrote, sometimes it is also known as the author's point of view on a subject. So I'm going to say usually it is the author's point of view, or their perspective, their opinion, point of view / perspective on a subject. Okay, now we're getting into what a theme isn't. Sorry, my notes are not perfect. Wow, it looks crooked on camera, but straight in real life. That's weird. Anyway, now we're going to talk about what a theme is not. Okay, if you are a teacher watching this video, there are going to be some things that I will say that will, I don't know, potentially trigger you. I've seen other teachers teach theme in like a really, really old-fashioned way, and I very, very, very vocally disagree with people that do it that way. So if you are a teacher watching this, don't get upset. This is just how I've learned it. And again, my definitions and my knowledge come out of the Bedford Glossary of Critical Literary Terms. So, okay. A theme is not just a topic or subject. These first two bullet points are going to be the ones that like teachers, I don't want to say mess up on, but the ones that teachers teach this way all the time. It is not just a topic or subject. We'll talk more about that in a second. It is not something that can be summarized in one word. And by one word, I'm mostly saying like a short phrase, like, if you say, oh, the theme is growing up, that's still not a theme, even though it's two words technically. We'll talk more about that in a second. But to give you an example, like I've seen other teachers before that are like, oh yeah, you have to write an essay on this, Johnny, and you have to write an essay about the theme of time. Okay, that's not a theme. That really is not a theme, and I don't know why some teachers like to assume that it is. Okay, a theme is not always the ending of a story, which should be pretty obvious to everyone. It is not always the ending. Sometimes you can have a theme established within the first 5 minutes of a story. That totally happens. It is not the same for every single person. This is super important. It's not the same for everyone. Again, I want to teach that mentality of embracing one's own answers, so on and so forth. Now, what ends up happening in my classroom is that I'll have a kid over here create a theme on their own, and I'll have a kid over there on the other corner of the room create a theme of their own. And what ends up happening every single year I teach this is that these two kids will have the exact same theme for possibly different topics and worded completely differently, but it's the same idea. And when that situation happens in my classroom, which it always does, it is a beautiful learning experience for the rest of my students because they realize that they're all moving in the same direction. And that's kind of the goal with how I teach theme. Okay, it's not the same for everybody. It's totally possible to have your own themes. Again, not trying to call out other teachers or anything, but I have seen teachers before that like will show The Great Gatsby or something like that, and they're going to say, this is the theme right here. And that's not a good way to do it. Sure, the teacher projecting their own theme is probably correct. Sure, but it's not teaching a constructive mindset for how do I analyze a story? How do I think about a story? How do I reflect on the story? It's not teaching those skills to students. It's basically just telling them this is what it is, and this is the only correct thing, which is not correct in my opinion. Okay. Lastly, what did I say? It's not going to be directly told to you. The theme is not, it's not going to be told to you. There are some exceptions to that. So it's not going to be told to the reader. I should have clarified earlier, but when I say reader, I also mean like audience member. So I'm including players. I'm including audiences for books and video games and all that. Okay, what do I mean by it's not going to be told to you directly? So there are some exceptions to that. Like if you have a children's book, like anything by Dr. Seuss or Aesop's Fables, things like that, sometimes, usually depending on like the version of the text you're reading or whatever, it literally will spell out the moral of the story, the theme, or whatever it is by the end. And that's okay for children, because children are trying to gain like those foundational reading skills, and they need to pick up on messages like that. They won't always be able to have the skill set of analyzing text to figure it out on their own. Now, the other exception to this of it's not going to be told directly to you is if you have a crappy book. If it's just poorly written, cough, cough, Ready Player One, that book is garbage. If you have a book like that that's just like trashy fiction or nonfiction, then yes, it probably will be like the theme will most likely just be beating you over the head at some point in the story, and that's just kind of how it is. I really, really hate that book, so if you're offended by that, I'm sorry. Okay, take a look at this list, all right? I show this in my classroom, and I ask my students, are these themes? And I want them to shout out yes or no. So take a look at that list. Are those themes? Now, if you're looking at that, and you're instantly going to respond with, no, they're not themes, then my response to you is why? Now, most kids, bless their hearts and souls, I love them, most kids will just respond with, oh, well, they're one word. Perfect. Yes, you are correct, but that doesn't explain why they're still wrong or why they're not themes. The thing that you need to think about here is this. A theme is supposed to be the hidden message of the story. The message of the story. That's implying that a lot of information that you need to gain, right? So if I just went up to you and I said, hey, did you know that Romeo and Juliet is it's about romance? Okay, realistically speaking, did you learn anything about Romeo and Juliet besides what I just told you, that it's about romance? Did you learn anything else? The answer is no, right? But if I went up to you and I'm like, oh yeah, Romeo and Juliet is about how teenage romance never works out in the end because teenagers are incapable of communicating with each other. Okay, if I told you something like that, like really specific, did you learn something about Romeo and Juliet? The answer is yes. Now, that's according to my interpretation, okay? Some people might disagree with that. Some people, in terms of Romeo and Juliet, they might pin the blame on other people in the story, so on and so forth. Now, if I went up to you and I'm like, oh yeah, The Outsiders is about friendship. Cool, did you learn anything about The Outsiders? No. But if I'm like, oh yeah, The Outsiders is about how friendship can form an eternal bond that can basically act like a family, something like that. That's a really cheesy way to look at it, but that works. Did you learn anything? You did. Okay. So these are not themes. These are topics. Like, for example, when I just talked about that teacher who gave an essay about time with a certain book, this was a senior teacher that I met a long time ago. The students that I had taught were very confused because they're like, well, what about time? What about it? Is it good? Is it bad? What does it do for me? Like, what do you mean? And the teacher was just like, write an essay about time. See, that's a topic. That's not a theme. A theme is supposed to be a message. It's supposed to be something that teaches the reader something about whatever it is that you're experiencing. So now take a look at this. This is a list of themes that I just really quickly threw together like a super long time ago. This is a terrible list. It's old. I don't like it, but it's functional. Okay. So if we were talking about like good and evil on the previous slide, and here we're like, oh, good and evil can coexist. Cool. So like good and evil can work together. Okay. That's a theme. Or what about like the topic of life? That's not a theme. But here I have like, oh, the circle of life always continues. Okay, cool. I get that. That's a message that like life and death are natural. Sure. See what I mean? These are themes. They're not very strong ones, but they are themes. Now, I used to have this slide where I would like clarify the information, but you can take a look at that if you need to pause the video, but I think it makes sense to most people by now. A theme is usually supposed to be like a complete idea. Now, take a look at this. A long time ago when I was teaching middle school, I gave these themes that are in this box to my middle school students, and my middle school students were vastly confused, right? And it's because I was fresh out of college and I was basically like throwing college level information at them, like, oh yeah, The Outsiders is a coming of age story. My kids had no clue what that meant, right? So I realized at the time that I needed to go a step above, and I needed to basically rewrite all of my themes to be longer sentences that give clarifying information. Okay, so that transformed my themes into what you see right there on the PowerPoint slide, and they're color coded so you can match them up, right? That makes a lot more sense. Now, usually when I'm showing this in my classroom, I will ask my kids like, yeah, can you think of a story that does this, does this? And kids will usually come up with examples. That's a good thing to do if you are a teacher watching this. So, sorry, my nose is running. Now, we're going to move on to how do you actually build a theme. Some kids may have, more space on the page than me, but for me, I'm going to go to a new page here. Okay. Theme. We're going to talk about how to build. There are 6 steps involved with how to build a theme. All right, now, I guess I should clarify before. So here's how this works. When I am giving this to my students, I will require them to do all 6 steps the first few times we do this. I have found over the years that doing this process with them, like modeling it, practicing it over and over again, is extremely beneficial to them. If you're a teacher watching this and you want some tips and tricks, here you go. So I've also noticed that doing this one time with a story, like you make the kids only pull out one theme, I have found that that will almost inadvertently lock them into that theme, and they will become incapable of understanding other people's themes, kind of. So what I usually do now is when I get to step 4 of this process, I have the kids perform steps 4 through 6 twice. So I make them basically pull out 2 themes from the story. That way they can like try to think in different directions and do things like that. So that's pretty helpful. The other thing you need to keep in mind is that this process, for both students and teachers, by the way, this process is like training wheels. You are supposed to take them off eventually, okay? I expect that my students will want to skip steps because they're like, I don't want to do as much work. Sure. The first few times we do this, we do all 6 steps, and I force them to do it that way. But eventually they get to the point where when we do theme drills theme drills are basically my activity where I have something crazy like 40 to 50 like short little videos, animations, commercials, things like that. Like videos that are between a minute to 20 minutes long, and we watch these rapidly and we like try to quickly create themes as fast as possible. So I would encourage you to do something like that, where the students are getting like a lot of practice with very different stories or narratives, and then they can practice this all the time. And eventually your students will get to the level where they are just skipping steps because they simply don't need like the first 3, for example. Most kids will be able to jump to step 4 and then immediately go into step 6 if they understand what they're doing. So that's kind of the goal here at the end of this. And now my former students who have like long since graduated my class, they still like, they don't remember the process for how to build a theme, but they know how to find it. They know how to build one, which is ultimately the end goal here. You want to make this seem as natural as possible. So then that way you barely have to think about it. So just keep in mind, if you are a student watching this, eventually you will throw this process away because it will just become natural to you. And it will seem really odd when it gets to that point. Okay, so the first thing, what's the first step you need to do? You need to make a list of your characters. You need to tell me what they do and how they end up. So for step number 1, I'm going to say list characters. List characters, their actions, end result. How do they end up in the end? Now, if you guys have been watching some of my other videos, like the plot tracking video and all that, I have been talking about this short story called Searching for Summer. Searching for Summer is a short science fiction story about how the world is permanently covered in clouds because of war. And so these 2 people, Tom and Lily, get they are newlyweds. They get married, and they're basically going on their honeymoon to find some sunshine. Yay! It's a really simple story. So here's my little chart here. I have Tom, Lily, and Mr. Noakes, who for the most part are like the main characters of the story. What does Tom do? He drives his wife through the countryside. How do they end up? They find some sunshine. Lily, same thing, whatever. Okay? Make a list of your characters. Tell me their actions. Tell me how they end up. Really, really simple. Step number 2, you have to review the plot. Keep in mind, a lot of students are not going to want to do this step because, oh my God, they have to do work. So reviewing the plot basically means that you need to know the story in and out. Let's talk about this for a second if you are a student watching this video. So if you are taking a standardized test like the AZ Merit, the ACT, or whatever, you're taking some kind of test and they're going to make you read some like 20-page passage, and then they're going to ask you a multiple choice question that says, what is the theme? Okay, they're going to give you 4 options most likely, and here's the thing about this. 1, I don't like standardized test questions that do this because theme is supposed to be a personal thing that you build. Whatever. These questions can be extremely difficult because you're basically trying to pinpoint what most people would find. But a lot of these questions will have trick answers because they will expect that you will stop reading the story at a certain point. And if you do not experience the entire story as a whole, you're going to have a completely different theme. That's just how it is. One of the videos that I show in my classroom called The Dam Keeper, which is amazing, by the way. The Dam Keeper is set up so that if you stop the video at a certain point, you're going to get a theme for that. But then there's still more of the video that you can play. And so depending on where you stop the story, you're going to have a wildly different theme than other people. So it's extremely important that you actually experience the entire story as a whole. You know, if you take a look at a movie like Inception or, you know, any story-based game, you can't just like leave and go to the bathroom for 20 minutes. You know, those 20 minutes are critical to developing your plot and your characters and things like that. So you're going to miss things. So anyway, step number 2 is review the plot. Now, how can you review the plot? You could either do Freytag's Pyramid, or you can write a paragraph summary. I wrote 1 to 4 sentences, but that's like a baby paragraph. Paragraphs are usually like 8 to 12. Either way, you can write a little paragraph summary, or you can do Freytag's Pyramid like I showed you in my other videos. Step number 3, find the tone and the mood. Okay, for finding the tone and the mood, if you guys are watching the Elements of Lit notes, finding the tone and the mood is a separate element, and I've already taught you how to actually do that. You have to ask yourself 3 questions. The questions are, what does the author feel? Which, again, you'll never get an answer to because, like, you're the one kind of guessing. The second question is, what do the characters feel? And the third question is, what do I feel as the reader? Okay, you find the tone and the mood. That's like the easiest way to do it. Now, tone and mood technically are different terms that mean different things. I don't really care. I'm lumping them together. I'm kind of cheating here. I will say this, though. Pretty much every story that exists is going to be happy and sad. You just need to kind of like get rid of that. You need to try and find more complicated terms here. Like, is the story cynical? Is it depressing? Is it pessimistic? Is it apathetic? Things like that. You need to try and beef up your vocabulary. Now, if you don't know what apathy is, for example, like apathy is the feeling of like giving up because nothing matters. There are a lot of stories that do that. You know, something that's cynical is going to have like a really completely different tone than something that's funny. You just kind of need to figure it out on your own. Okay, step 4. I will say this, that step 4 is going to be the step where like a lot of kids struggle with this process, okay? So listen up. Step number 4, you need to find the topics / big ideas. Find the topics / big ideas. Okay. I'm going to, if you guys can see my notes right here. No, get off the screen. If you guys can see my notes, I'm going to put a little arrow right here, and I'm going to clarify all of this information with those bullet points that are there. Okay, what do I mean by find the topics? What you're trying to do is basically take a story like Freedom Writers or The Giver, The Outsiders, Romeo and Juliet, whatever, and you're trying to narrow it down to like its core ideas. What are the main ideas that it has? So, for example, my students just watched the movie Freedom Writers, which is about a teacher that's fresh out of college that goes to a really rough school, and she helps these kids learn who they are. So that movie involves the topic of school, teaching, gangs, racism, death, shootings, learning, personal growth, education, graduation, like rule breaking. You know, like there's all sorts of topics, right? Think about The Outsiders. Okay, you have friendship, you have death, you have life, you have sacrifice, you have fear. You know, fear is kind of an emotion, but it's still a topic. You have growth, you have I think I said friends already. You know, you just have like all of those different ideas. Think about Frozen. Okay, Frozen, you have family, you have superpowers, you have winter, you have journey, you have loss, you have creation, things like that. You know, Moana, sorry, to give you more examples, Moana, you have like supernatural, you have paranormal, you have journey, you have ocean, you have boat, you have destiny, you have heritage, you have responsibility. Let's see, what else? Regret, you know, things like that. So try to take the story and break it down into its most core bullet points, so to speak. Its most core ideas. Okay, find the topics and big ideas. What does that mean? This would be like major talking points. Major talking points or areas of discussion. Areas of discussion. Major subjects. / topics / ideas. I think that pretty much sums it up. I could say major actions. Major actions, okay? You definitely want to, at this point, you want to think about the characters and like how they're moving through the story. What happens to them? Oh, they go on a journey, okay? oh, they experience loss, they experience creation, they experience love, they experience fear. Keep in mind that some students will mix up topics with emotions. And it just kind of depends on the story, really. Like, one of the stories that I show involves a character with OCD, and it specifically is a story about how that character overcomes their OCD. So OCD could be a topic, or like disorders could be a topic. But like, usually what ends up happening is, like, I'll get kids that watch a story like Freedom Riders or something, and they'll say like, oh, a topic is happy. Not really. Like, that doesn't really work. Okay. You kind of need to be specific, and you just need to be careful about that. Sometimes emotions can be topics, but it just depends on how they're being used. Okay, now to give you like a quick little demonstration, these are the topics that I had earlier, like risks, parents, loneliness, friendship, illusions, growing up, greed, trust, friends, life, love, all that other garbage. All of those are topics. Okay, now topics are usually like maybe 1 to 3 words. Usually they're 1 to 2 words, like growing up. Okay. Like love and hate could work, I guess. But usually topics are going to be really, really short and sweet, whereas themes are going to be like sentences. Okay. And, I'll give you a demonstration here in a bit. Step number 5. Okay. You need to listen carefully on this one. If you're a teacher, this should make a lot of sense to you. If you're a student, you're going to be annoyed at me. So here's what you need to do. You need to pull out as many topics as possible. What ends up happening in my classroom is I will show a video for the theme drills, and I'll usually show like a confusing story that my kids kind of understand, but not really. And then I'll be like, what kind of topics were here? And what always ends up happening, because kids are like racking their brain, but they're being lazy about it, is that they will pull out like maybe 5 topics. Okay, maybe if I'm lucky, as an entire classroom of like 35 kids, I'll get like 5 topics. And what I do as a teacher is I literally just get mad at them, and I just stay up on the whiteboard, and I just wait. And I'm like, I'm not going anywhere until you give me more. And so you have to, like, what I do for my kids is I force them to come up with as many topics as possible by recapping the story over and over again. So reviewing the plot over and over again until they pull out as many things as possible. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, for the teachers that are, if any teachers are watching this, there are some videos that I show that are so confusing, or at least they have so many ideas going on in them, that sometimes I literally can pull out like 40 or 50 topics from a single video that's only 8 minutes long. Some of the videos that I have are that deep. And when my kids, like, this always ends up happening, when it gets to the point where my kids like pull back and they see all of the different topics that we have, they're just like, holy crap, I didn't realize there was that much in the story happening. Yes, there's that much happening. Now, let's say hypothetically, for the purposes of these notes, let's say that we have a list of like 30 to 50 topics out of a movie or something, right? This is what you do for step 5. You take one of those topics and you ask yourself a question. So what I'm going to say here is pick a topic. You pick one, and then you find the author's message. Okay? Now this involves you asking yourself a question. For students that are watching this, you are probably going to get annoyed because you're like, I have to literally write down this question and answer. Yes, you do. This is going to help you figure it out. So I'm going to put a little note down here and say, ask yourself the following question. If you can spell properly, which I can't. Ask yourself this question. What was the author of story trying to tell you about topic? What was, in brackets, I'm going to say author. What was author trying to say or trying to tell me about? Trying to say about topic. Okay, so you ask yourself, what was the author trying to tell me about blank? And then what you need to do for step 5 is answer the question. Now, on my worksheets, I already have the question written out there. What was the author trying to tell you about blank? And kids will just answer it, right? If you're doing this in your notes or whatever, you would literally just answer. If you know the question in your head, you would just boom, come up with an answer for it. So think about Freedom Writers, think about The Outsiders, think about Romeo and Juliet. Get a bunch of topics down, pick one of them. What was the author trying to tell you about that topic? There's your theme, okay? We're not quite done yet, but that is a theme. Now, okay, between 5 and 6, because remember there's 6 steps to building a theme here. Let's just pretend there's a step 5.5. In between these 2 steps, are you creating a theme about the story? Yes, you are. But at this point, you need to slowly pull back and start making it a universal message about life. Okay? We'll talk more about that in a second. So I have Searching for Summer as my example here. And if you guys are reading the PowerPoint slide, in Searching for Summer, there's a bunch of different topics like weddings, honeymoons, love, countryside, helping the elderly, forest, lost, hidden places, whatever, right? I picked the topic of love because I wanted to make it really, really simple. Okay, so this is what I came up with. The author of Searching for Summer is trying to tell the reader that love can be precious and found in small, hidden places. Okay, cool. There's my central message. Or there's my author's message. The author of Searching for Summer is trying to tell the reader that love can be precious and found in small, hidden places. Because the story involves the main characters finding a small little place in the middle of nowhere. It's really, really precious. Okay? Which leads me to step 6. Step 6 is summarize and polish. So what you just created is technically a theme, but there's some trimming that we need to do here. So basically what you want to do is you want to take your author's message, or central message is what I wrote on my PowerPoint slide. Again, I haven't updated this PowerPoint in a long time. You take your author's message, which is right here. The author of Searching for Summer is trying to tell the reader that love can be precious, found in small hidden places. And basically what you want to do is you want to cut out the unnecessary crap that you just put in your sentence. So the title of the story, the author of the story was trying to tell the reader, all that stuff you get rid of. And you just want to keep the core main idea. Now, if I look at that and I keep my topic and my core idea as much as I can, this is what I end up with. It becomes love can be precious and found in small hidden places. Boom. That's a theme. Okay. Now, again, at this point in time, when you get to step 6, you should really start to pull back a little bit because you're trying to make a message about life. Is it going to connect to the story? Yes, but it's supposed to be a universal message. So try to make it something that could be universal, that could apply to anyone, anywhere, anytime. Now, that concept right there, that love is precious and can be found in small hidden places, basically what that means is that love doesn't have to be complicated. It can be a romance can be a small little simple gesture or place or whatever. That idea is really universal. A lot of people from many different countries and walks of life can experience something like that. So that's why it works. Okay, so summarize and polish. You want to cut off the stuff you don't need. If you guys want to write down what you want to cut out here, or you want to write down my example, here's the rest of the area for you to do that with. For the purposes of my note taking, I think I'm done. But if there's anything that I verbally said there that you think you should write down, you probably should. Now, this video is not done yet because I'm going to demonstrate theme using one of my favorite stories. So we still have a little bit left. So just hang with me. Now I'm going to demonstrate everything. So here's a quick review if you need to pause the video and take a look. Okay. All right. Now, I love this story called The Fox and the Grapes. The Fox and the Grapes is one of Aesop's fables, if you guys have ever seen that book before. You guys have probably, if you've had a childhood, you've probably heard of the story of The Tortoise and the Hare. Tortoise and the Hare is another Aesop's fables. basically, these are like really, really, really short stories for little kids to teach them life lessons. Yay. So I'm gonna read you my favorite one, which is The Fox and the Grapes. Okay. Now, when I read this in class, there were a good chunk of my students that were just like, I don't get it. Like, they straight up were just confused. So let's see how good you can do. Okay. All right. So once upon a time, on a hot summer's day, there was a lonely fox who's traveling through a beautiful orchard. Okay, and it's a really hot summer's day, right? So he's trotting along, and he's looking around, and he's in this like beautiful orchard that's like blooming, and there's ripe fruit everywhere. Whatever. Okay. Now this fox is like, "Hey, bro, I'm really tired, man." And he really needed something to slake his thirst. He's really thirsty, right? So he looks around and he's like, ooh. And then he sees some grapes on a vine, right? And he's like, perfect. Just the thing I need for my thirst, to quench my thirst. Okay? So the fox does one of these. He takes a few steps back and he's like, okay, all I got to do is just run and jump, right? So the fox takes a few steps back. He runs forward and he jumps as high as he can, and he tries to bite at the grapes, right? Now, he can't reach them, okay, because they're so high up on this vine, and, foxes are really, really short. So this fox, he's like, okay, whatever, no big deal. He keeps trying, right? He runs a few more times, he jumps a few more times, he can't reach. Now, as if to make matters worse, this little bird flies by, and this little bird just leans on a branch and just starts watching him like this. It doesn't do anything else, right? Now, if you guys have ever had that feeling where like you're doing something and you're not really doing it perfectly, and then somebody starts watching you and then you start doing worse at that thing, that's basically what's happening here. So the fox keeps like running and jumping and trying to bite at these grapes, and he can't reach. And then eventually he gets so discouraged by this whole situation, the fox just turns around and walks off, and he's like, whatever, I'm sure those grapes were sour anyway. So he didn't actually want them, right? Okay, there's the story. So a fox is thirsty. He tries to get some grapes. He can't get them. He's like, whatever. They probably sucked anyway. They probably weren't that great. There's the story, okay? Now, when I read this in class, sometimes I get students that are just like, I don't get it. Now, if you are one of those people who's like, I don't get it, making a theme, as I said earlier, making a theme can help you get it. So let's make a theme, shall we? Here's the entire process, just in case you needed to see it one more time. We're going to go through every single step all in one shot here. It's going to be a piece of cake. So first things first, who is my main character? If you were like, well, bro, it's the fox, you are correct. Okay, what does my fox do? Look how adorable he is. What's my fox do? He tries to get some grapes. How does he end up in the end? He doesn't get them. My other character is a bird. And what does my burb do? My burb watches the fox. Look how sad he is. It's so sad. Oh my God. Okay. Now, let's create a summary. Let's review the plot. I made a 3-sentence summary of this story, so here we go. Aesop's fable, The Fox and the Grapes, shows a story about a thirsty fox traveling a hot summer day. At an orchard, the fox sees a grapevine but can't seem to reach the grapes despite jumping. In the end, the fox walks away thinking the grapes are most likely sour and that he didn't actually want them. There you go. Okay, now we're going to move on. Just in case that was a little fast for you, I'm sorry. Now we have to find the tone and the mood. So, what kind of feelings is the fox feeling? Well, these are the ones that I came up with. So we have anger. Okay, the fox is angry because he can't do something. We do have envy. Envy is like jealousy. The fox is jealous. He can't fly. Get the grapes. Okay. We do have sadness, probably because the fox is disappointed in himself, whatever. We're kind of like reaching on that one, but it works. We do have joy because in the beginning of the story, the fox is like, ooh, and he sees those grapes and he's like, bam, that's what I want. Okay. And there's also this word, which is called indignation. If you are a student watching this, do you have siblings? Because if you have siblings before and you have ever had the feeling of it's not fair, congratulations. You have felt what is known as indignation. Indignation is the feeling of it's not fair. You learned a new word today. Yay. Okay. Now we need to find the topics. There are a lot of topics you could pull out of this story. But because this is a children's story and it's trying to be simple and all that, these are the ones that I just came up with on my own, okay? So I have inadequacy. The fox is literally inadequate. He cannot do the task. Okay? He can't jump high enough. There is jealousy. The fox is jealous he can't fly. There is survival, because the fox needs those grapes. Okay? There's also vanity, because, and if you don't know what vanity means, it means like you have too much pride in yourself. So the fox is too prideful to keep going. There's also curiosity, because you have the bird who's just like kind of watching, in the first place. And then I also said aloofness. Aloofness is like a bystander who does not want to get involved in a situation. Okay? So if I take these things, if I take these topics, and I try to find a central author's idea or central message, whatever you want to say, this is what I came up with. I said, Aesop, the author of The Fox and the Grapes, is trying to tell the reader the characters can get jealous or angry at things they can't have, especially when there are other people around that can achieve those things. All right? Now, that is my theme. That's a really long theme. That's a lot of writing. And some students will be like, I don't want to write that much, which is why we have step 6. Step 6 is to summarize and polish. So take a look at this. If I take my theme right here, Aesop, the author of The Fox and the Grapes, is trying to tell the reader characters can get jealous or angry at things they can't have when other people can have those things. How do I cut that down? Remember, you just want to remove the author, the title, and you want to try and trim up as many unnecessary words as possible, which leads to this. Jealousy of other people can lead you to having hatred of something. Now, please remember, in my process of building a theme, this is you pulling back from the story to try and make it a message about life. Now, I can still cut that down even further if I really wanted to get all Star Wars-y on me. I can say jealousy leads to hatred. Oh, isn't that sad? So think about it like this. If you guys can take all of those steps and try to practice them as much as possible, you will become masters at building theme. Now, there is something that I want to mention here. If you, I have this diagram on here. If you take the characters in the plot and you combine it with a summary and you combine it with what is the author trying to tell you, that is what theme is. Okay? Mind blown. Oh my God, good for you. All right. Now, there is something to mention here. So, keep in mind that for the big list of topics that you're eventually going to have for a story, think about it like this. If you could pull out, theoretically, 30 to 50 topics from a complicated story, you could theoretically make 1 to 2 to 3 themes for each of those topics. That's a lot of freaking themes. And that's usually how stories are. Okay, as a teacher, I have come to find themes that I've never even thought of because of my students. My students have seen things that I cannot see because of their experiences and things like that. And that is a perfect learning opportunity, not only for the classroom, but also for myself. So if you're a teacher watching this, I would encourage you to try practicing this and look at my theme drills. Use my theme drills if you can. The theme drills involve students having to rapidly watch videos and rapidly creating themes. Then when we're done and everyone's in an okay situation, assuming they got 1 or 2 themes, then what we do is we share as a table. Then when everyone's had a chance to share their themes, then we share as a class and we give finger snaps for the ones that we really, really like. And doing that is invaluable to my classroom because my students are able to see what everyone else is coming up with. And usually we end up getting some kids that are almost always like, ooh, when they hear a really good one. Or they're just like, dang, oh my God. Like getting stuff like that. Getting those experiences, those like eye-opening experiences are what this is all about. So anyway, that's my lesson on how to build a theme. I'm sorry this video was so long, but hopefully that gives you something to think about. And if you are a student or another teacher watching this and you thought this was valuable, leave a comment, man. Comments are great or something like that. I don't know, contact me somehow. Keep in mind, I did not come up with this process entirely on my own. I got this from another teacher. So, yeah, that's all I got for you. I would encourage you to go do theme drills and share what you have, but it's a little too hard to post things on YouTube, so because of copyright and all that. So anyway, good luck making themes. Go make some good ones out there.